Welcome friends, it's Rae. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's video is part of a collaboration with some crafty friends saluting crafty moms for Mother's Day. So I will list everybody in the hop in my description below, so please be sure to check them out and let them know you came over from my YouTube video. Now let's move to our project. Here I've got my Gelpress on the door of my Misty, and so that will hold it. Bringing in my Distress Oxide in saltwater taffy and inking up my brayer just on the left side. And I'm making sure that I have rolled the color on the entire wheel. And so here I am just rolling it on to my gel plate, and you can see that it's beading up, but that's what I want because that's going to give my design texture. So now I'm bringing in my seedless preserves and inking that up on the right. As I roll this on to my gel press, I am blending the seedless preserves and the saltwater taffy. And here's, I'm wiping off some of that ink onto a scratch piece of copy paper. But if you wanted to, you could have used that for on cardstock to get another print. But I'm just cleaning off my brayer. I've brought in my speckled egg oxide ink and am blending the bottom of my press. I'm bringing in my cardstock, 65-pound cardstock, and just laying that on top and rubbing the entire side of that panel. And look at that. Lovely. I want a little more of that speckled egg at the bottom. So I am inking up my brayer again and am going to just roll out more of that color on the bottom of my panel. These gel press prints are so forgiving, and this blue is going to add a little more texture at the bottom, and when it dries back you will see it's going to look a lot better than it does right this minute. I've cleaned my gel press, placed it directly on the grid mat on my table, bringing in Solar Flare Nuvo shimmer powder and just tapping the backside lightly. Too much tapping could yield too much powder, so trying to be as gentle as possible with my tapping. Here I'm bringing in the Golden Sparkler shimmer powder and mixing that, or tapping that lightly and trying to position it to blend in with the Solar Flare. Spritzing heavily with water. I'm using Canson XL watercolor paper because I knew that I'd be using a lot of water. I am pressing that on the plate, but not all the way to the bottom because I don't want a harsh line here. I am then just turning that over and pressing again. And this is the look I want. So I'm turning my paper, letting that liquid just flow. I'm going to keep dipping my paper into that color, just adding more color to my panel. And this is just reminiscent of ink smushing. I'm going to continue picking up color in portions of my panel where I want just a richer, darker color. I'm going to use my heat tool to speed up the drying of my panel. Look how quickly these two backgrounds came together. Once my panel is completely dry, I'm bringing in my palette and some of the golden sparkler shimmer powder and am tapping just a little of that on my palette. I'm going to mix it with water and then stir it with my paintbrush just to mix the color. And then I'm going to just tap that all over my panel to get that rich texture that I'm looking for. And I forgot to mention with my Canson XL watercolor paper, I am using the textured side because I want uh, oodles of texture in this background design. I used my heat tool once again to completely dry this panel.
So I used my Altenew floral there to cut out my floral die, and now I'm using my tweezers to just poke out my pieces. This is kind of thin in here, so trying to be more gentle in there for sure. So it has a nice cut on the ends. So oops, if you're making an A2 card, I believe it's going to cut exactly where you need that edge to be. But I am making a slimline card.
Looks like I lost a little footage there. I cut off with my scissors just the top right and bottom right where the die left the straight line. And so here I'm placing some water. I'm wetting my paper and just doing a tear. I want to have that tear texture here. And so just holding that paper um, and using holding with one thumb and using the other thumb to tear. I use my heat tool again to finish drying those areas that are just wet in order to get a good tear. Next, I'm going to trim this down to 7 7/8 long.
And when I was thinking of doing this card, this design, I thought that I would include some double-sided adhesive on the back before I die cut, but then I forgot. So I was thinking about this last night, and as I'm making this design now, I completely forgot until after I had die cut it out.
After I get my double-sided tape around the perimeter, I'm going to bring in my Ranger Multimedia Matte glue, which is really thin glue, and just go around the perimeter of each of the flowers and its leaves. I remove all of the release paper and then I will affix this panel directly to my 3¼ by 8½ inch slimline card base. There's a little overlap on my right floral. It sticks out over the edge, but that's okay. I am going to trim that down a little bit later. I've placed a scrap piece of black cardstock in my MISTI, placed my grid acetate grid sheet on top, and then I'm going to line up this sentiment from Sunny Studios that says Mother's Day. I remove my acetate grid, bringing in my anti-static powder bag here, and adding that to my cardstock, using clear Versamark ink to stamp my sentiment. I set that sentiment aside and bring in another piece of cardstock and lined up my word happy from that same Sunny Studios stamp set, Happy Thoughts, and prepping for heat embossing, and we'll go ahead and stamp again with Versamark ink. I stamped that 2 times, and once I get this stamped, I will go ahead and take both sentiments and add some white embossing powder. I'm using Alabaster White by Brutus Monroe. I'll use a dry paintbrush to remove some of the white stray powder from around my sentiment. After I get embossing powder on both sentiments, then I will go ahead and bring my heat gun in. And it is cold, so I'm going to start from the back and let it warm up basically, and then bring it to the front once it is warm, and go ahead and melt the powder for both of my sentiments. I love the look of white embossing powder on black. And here I'm finished with both, and we'll take my paper trimmer and trim down both of those sentiments. And I'm using the guide on my trimmer to try and get a really close cut. I don't want much of a border on either sentiment. I placed double-sided foam tape on the back of both sentiment strips. I have lined up my card on my grid mat along with my T ruler and figuring out the placement for my happy word. I want to cover the bottom stem, that I know, and I want to leave a little bit on the right. So getting that lined up and then committing it. Yay. And then I will bring in the Mother's Day and do the same thing. I want to center that with a happy and leave a little white space or space between the two sentiments. I did use my scissors to trim down the right floral that stuck beyond my card base, stuck out. I trimmed that down. I'm going to add a few drops of my Nuvo crystal drops in pale gold to accent and embellish this card. Oh, I love the way this card turned out. I think this one's my favorite. My next card is a 5x7 card, and I'm placing just a piece of cardstock on my much loved Make Art Station and a very large stencil from the Crafters Workshop, and just will hold that down with the magnets from the Make Art Station. I am going to add saltwater taffy directly to the panel. I'm not tapping off, which you can do usually when you don't want harsh lines, but here I just want color. And have brought in my speckled egg and blending in on either side of my saltwater taffy. Now my Kitsch Flamingo, blending out the rest of the panel with Kitsch Flamingo. And I did move my magnets to get the corners, and now spritzing with some water before removing my stencil. And I love the way this turned out. Off camera, I did use my heat tool to speed up the drying of this panel, and then trimmed it down to 4¼ by 6¼ This is the first panel I made on my Gelpress, and am trying to determine where I want my Altenew dye, and then it hits me. I did not line the back of my panel with double-sided tape. So I missed that in my first card. Definitely wanted to do it in this card. So yay, remembered. So I'm bringing in my 2-inch double-sided tape. and we'll affix that to the back panel. So I'm able to put two of these 2-inch wide pieces of tape on my panel, and then I have a little on tape panel, and I'm able to fit in my 1/8 inch double-sided tape along that line, and it ran this through my die cutting machine and am gently removing um, the die. I'm using my scissors to just trim out the right side of that panel, just meeting where the die left off. I'm using a waffle flower 5x7 A7 die that measures 4¼ by 6¼ to trim out to die cut my background panel. I brought in my trimmer and I'm going to trim down 1/8 of an inch off of off of the top and the bottom of my focal panel so that I can leave a small border. I carefully remove the release paper from my focal panel, and oh, this was so much easier. There were a few areas around the perimeter that did not have glue or double-sided tape, so I added a little liquid glue to those areas. Now I will affix my focal panel to my background panel, leaving about 1/4 of an inch border. I've stamped my sentiment on white cardstock this time, bringing in some purple embossing powder by Hero Arts and partially adding the powder to the top half of the word happy, and then bringing in the goldenrod from Hero Arts and adding that to the bottom of happy. Now this is my Mother's Day portion of the sentiment, and I have alternated between purple and goldenrod on this sentiment because it's smaller, so it's not as easy to do partial top and bottom on this one. So I'm coming in here with my dry paintbrush, removing a little of the purple from the Y so that I can add goldenrod. I heat set those sentiments off camera and trim them down, add double-sided foam tape, and I'm just placing my T-ruler on my grid mat, lining up my card panel, and holding it down with my Make Art Station magnets because my table underneath is metal, so it will hold. So if you have a magnetic mat, you can do that, or you can use your Make Art Station if you have that. So just lining up the word happy, and then I will line up the Mother's Day with that. So once I get Mother's Day lined up, I then add my panel to my 5x7 card base. And then I'm going to bring in some Nuvo crystal glitter drops in purple. Yay, love purple. So bringing in the Purple Rain drops, and we'll add 3 of those drops throughout my panel. Love the way this card turned out. Let's take a closer look at both cards I made in today's video. And be sure to check out the other crafters in today's hop as we salute crafty mothers. If you've enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, good day, friends.